So we've been exploring this year with the idea of the theme of creating a world that works for all. And this month we've been exploring the theme of a kinship with all life. And that's actually the talk title today is our kinship with all life. That we are one with all of life. All of life is one with us. There's no separation. We are connected with that. And the quote with which we're working from the vision, the global heart vision, is we see a world in which kinship with all life prospers. So what is kinship? I decided to look it up in the Merriam-Webster dictionary just to make sure that I was correct about this, because I have a high need to be right, and so, that's a good place to go to be right. Kinship, that's a joke. Kinship is the state of being related to people in your family, and it's also a feeling of being close or connected to other people. So we are all family on this planet. We're all family on this planet. As we look at this oneness with life, we begin to become aware of that. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's the great physicist, said, we have a genetic kinship with all life on Earth. So think about that. We're all out of the same gene pool, right? All life, all of life on this planet comes from the same gene pool. We like to separate ourselves and divide ourselves, and we find all sorts of wonderful creative ways to say, I'm different from you. But the real truth is, we're all from the same gene pool. Yes? Okay? So we're all connected. We're all interconnected. He goes on to say, and we have an atomic kinship to all matter in the cosmos. So all the matter in the cosmos is made of the same atoms. There's that old phrase, we're made of stardust. We're made of stardust. We're all made of the same atomic material as everything else in the universe. And so he says, so when I look at the universe, I feel large because I remind myself that not only are we living in this universe is living in us. Breathe that in for a moment. You are living in the universe, and the universe is living in you simultaneously. Isn't that cool? So we look up in the sky at night, and sometimes when I look up in the sky at night, you feel kind of pretty small, right? And sometimes I love that feeling because I take my so-called big problem, and then I look up at the stars at night and go, no, not so big, right? It kind of puts it in perspective. There's one of my favorite questions I heard a long time ago is will this matter 100 years from now? Okay? If Cynthia and I are fighting over who gets the brownie, will this matter 100 years from now? Go buy another brownie, So we don't fight over that, but if we were. So we're all truly family. Some of us are a little more functional than others, right? And the ones, by the way, who we think that they're not too functional, they're kind of looking back at us and going, you're not too functional either, right? So it's all perspective. I love back in the 80s, if you remember, for dysfunctional family stuff, John Bradshaw, anybody remember the author John Bradshaw? Right. And he had a wonderful metaphor because people would think about, how do I change my family? How can I change my family? And he would use the metaphor of a mobile, those little hanging art pieces where everything is suspended from everything else. And he said, a dysfunctional family is like that mobile being absolutely stationary. Everybody knows their roles. Everybody knows their places to stay in. And all it takes is one person to touch one part of that mobile, and the whole thing moves, right? The whole thing is interconnected. If I want to change the planet, who do I change first? Myself. I start with me. And so this is true not only of this mobile, but this is true in consciousness. John Muir, the great environmentalist who was seminal in getting Yosemite set up as a park back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, said, when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. Isn't that cool? When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe. You and I are one. You and I are one. So I want to give an example of how this works. I have a video that I decided I wanted to show today because I think it illustrates the point really well. It's about a 4.5-minute video. And so I want us to go ahead and watch that, and we'll talk about it afterwards in a minute.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half-century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years. That the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds and migratory birds started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed. More pools formed. More riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilized the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was less soil erosion because the vegetation stabilized that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
Isn't that cool? I remember right, it was 12 wolves that they introduced to Yellowstone, just 12. Changed the ecology, changed the rivers, literally. So we think about, sometimes, oh, I'm so small, I'm so little, what kind of a change can I make? Okay? Now, the wolves didn't sit there and come in and say, how can we re-engineer the rivers, right? They didn't do that. They came in and just were themselves. They were their authentic self, who they truly were. And in that process, they began to restore, because they normally belonged in that ecology anyways, they began to restore the ecology of the place to what it was. So how this works in one place, of course, is how it works everywhere. How it works, what we do in one part of our life is how we work every part of our life. So the question we might want to think about is, in whose part do we make the changes? In whose part do I need to make my changes? My own part. My own part. Ernest Holmes tells us that if we think we can guide our brother aright, while our own feet still walk in darkness, we are mistaken. We must first clarify our own vision. Then we shall become as lights, lighting the way for others. So we must first clarify our own vision. So out of this, I want to invite us to contemplate a couple of things. If the wolves represent our true balanced nature, then what aspects of that nature do we need to reintroduce into our own part? In a way, where is my wildness? Because I think of the wolves as kind of being wild, right? Where's the wildness that belongs within me? Where does it need to be reintroduced? And what do I need to release? A lot of times we have pushed off our wildness because we're afraid of what other people might think about that, right? Don't want to get too far out there. Don't want to get too wild. I might get judged. You know what? You will be judged. You know what else? You're already being judged, so you might as well have fun with it, right? I love it. Every once in a while we get some feedback about our services, and what I've come to realize is I don't think we could put together a Sunday service that would please every single person in this room. Somebody thinks the announcements are too long, somebody thinks they're too short, somebody thinks the talk's too long, somebody thinks the talk's too short, too much earnest, not enough earnest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We should have a little more music, we should have a little less music, and all of it is just our perspective. And I'm not saying anybody's wrong for that, it's just, but we're constantly working with this idea that somebody else always thinks they have a better way to do it. And for themselves, they do. And so then we're in the process of balancing what works for all. But in our own life, what works for my allness? What works for my true, authentic self? So remember that the wolves cut down on what was overgrown, right? They came in and I read that the narrator is British. In Britain, they call elk deer. Okay, you notice that most of those pictures were actually elk, right? Yeah. Yeah. So they're actually called, the Brits apparently call them deer elk or something like that. I don't remember what it is. But the wolves came in and started killing the deer, right? So what is it in our life that is overgrown, that has kind of taken over, gotten fat and lazy, because the deers had no predators. The elk had no predators. There was nothing to balance them out with, and so they could kind of spread out and take over everything, right? I don't know about you, but I know in parts of my life there are things that have spread out and taken over everything. My love of chocolate might be one of those, or good food. And so it's not always pretty or comfortable for us to make these changes. It's not always pretty or comfortable. We say we want to, yes, I want to be my true authentic self, but then when it comes down to the day-to-day, am I really willing to have parts of me that I'm willing to release? Parts of me that I'm willing to have die off because they really don't serve my wholeness anymore, even though I've grown rather fond of them. And even though it's very easy for them to grow in this area. Am I willing to kind of walk through that difficult part? So what am I willing to die off that no longer serves me? And so I invite you to ask yourself that question, just contemplate that. What am I willing to let go of? What am I willing to die off that doesn't serve me anymore so that I can come back into a true balance? See, what I said about the rivers was, it wasn't so much that they changed the rivers, they stabilized everything around the rivers. And so the river could flow through. Spirit can flow through when we start to stabilize our lives so that they're not constantly shifting and Spirit's moving all this way and that because we're not really sure of the direction we want to have Spirit be moving in. One of the powerful things about affirmative prayer that Marilyn was talking about earlier is that it helps us to stabilize our consciousness in a direction. So as I allow myself to rebalance, as I allow me to rebalance, because we're interconnected with all of life, what happens to all of life? It rebalances, right? So the effect that I have on me touches everything else. A couple of weeks ago, we did that wonderful meditation on the net of Indra and imagining ourselves, visualizing ourselves as a part of that net of all life interconnected. And it wasn't something that we had to make happen. The net wasn't something we had to create. It's already here. We just became aware of it. And so as we work, whatever we do jingles along that net of life. Thomas Trord tells us that all of Spirit is a unity. That is, it's all present at the same point of space and time simultaneously. So what I do here affects everything else in the universe simultaneously in consciousness. Okay? So anything that I can do to rebalance myself simultaneously begins to rebalance all of life. And so this week I'm going to invite you to do 3 things in that process to begin to rebalance. The first one is to contemplate your oneness with all of life. Spend some time just becoming aware of that. You know, Ernest Holmes says that all nature shows a divine relatedness. I have but to contemplate the blade of grass, the growing leaf, or the solar system to see that that which has created me has shaped and arranged all things to prosper and to exist in harmony. How about if this week we take a little time to contemplate a blade of grass, a growing leaf? We got plenty of them right now in springtime. Or the solar system, the universe of stars that we see above us. If we take some time to look at that, to become aware of that. You know, it's we talk every once in a while about take the time to smell the roses, right? Take the time to contemplate the oneness of life. Take the time to just look at that and recognize this blade of grass and I are genetically connected. Everything is genetically connected. Everything is atomically connected. So that's the first thing, is to contemplate my oneness with all of life. The second thing is to ask, where does the wildness of my true nature need to be reintroduced? Where is the wildness of my true nature? That part of me that's the passion, that's the joy, that's the aliveness, the vibrancy of who I am. Where does that need to be reintroduced in my life? What does it look or feel like? And who am I really? Am I really this kind of person who's kind of afraid or backs off or trying to be proper and fit in and be a good boy or a good girl? Okay? Or am I a person who's really willing to step out? You know, we just had the artist Prince pass away this past week. And one of the things that people admire about him was he was a person who stepped out. Okay? He wasn't tame, right? He wasn't the normal musician, right? Yes? Those who are familiar with him? Yeah. Okay? And we value people who are like that. We love them. We love that passion and that aliveness within them because it resonates with the aliveness that we want to express ourselves. And so rather than putting somebody else on a pedestal and say, wow, isn't he or she great? It's like, where can I put myself on that pedestal and say, I'm going to allow my own aliveness, my own love, my own joy, my own true nature to come out. So that's the second one, is to ask, where does this wildness of my true nature need to be reintroduced? And the third is to say yes. To say yes to my true nature. To say yes to that. To check your heart and to open your heart to your greatness. To open your heart to your greatness. Because it's not your intellect that'll do this work for you, okay? It's our hearts. Check with our hearts for our greatness. I want to close with a quote from the poet Ian Thomas. He says, and every day the world will drag you by the hand, yelling, this is important, and this is important, and this is important. And you need to worry about this, and this, and this. And each day, it's up to you to yank your hand back, put it on your heart, and say, no, this is what's important. This week I invite you to say this is what's important. This is where your park is. This is where your wildness is. This is where your love is. Let's pray. So knowing there is that one infinite presence, it is the pure, perfect ecology of the entire universe. There's the wisdom that knows exactly how to create all of life, be all of life, and express through all of life. There is that infinite presence, and it is all that there is. As the opening reading said, we live, move, and have our being within that one life. We live in the universe, and the universe lives within us. We live in spirit, and spirit lives within us. We are one of that. We are one of that infinite presence. We are one of that infinite whole. And so in that awareness of it, I speak my word that each of us begins to open to that aliveness, that vibrancy of spirit, and allows our own ecology to be brought back into balance of the truth of who we are, the capital T truth of who we are. That anywhere we're out of alignment with that, anywhere we're not experiencing the love, the joy, the prosperity, the health, the just wisdom, creativity, and absolute joy of being alive, that anywhere we're not experiencing that, we move back into that. We let go of whatever has been keeping us from that in the past. We allow that infinite presence that is greater, that knows exactly how to live and be and have its aliveness through us to do so. We say yes to that presence. We say yes to that aliveness. And so for each of us who say yes, and for all the good that comes out of this, for all the blessings that is brought throughout all of life, the rebalancing of all of life, including our own that comes out of this, I am grateful, ever so grateful, for the spirit that moves through all of us. I am ever so grateful. And so in that state of gratitude, in that consciousness of gratitude, I release this word into that, what we call the law, the process of creation. The process of moving it from thought into form and expression and experience. Knowing that it knows exactly how to do so in each of our lives, that all we do is say yes, and it begins to move. And for this, I'm so grateful. I call it good, in each of us good. And together we say, and so it is. Thank you and blessings.